Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Bootstrapped Solo. I am your host, Pratik Shah, and today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly about running your own practice. This podcast is for those that want to know what it's really like to start, run, and grow a practice. Today's guest is my good friend, Arthur DeGidio. He runs an 8-person practice out of San Diego that focuses on personal injury. He started his practice 12 years ago and has been growing strong ever since. Arthur, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Arthur, for being on. Obviously, you and I have a unique relationship. Just for all the listeners to get them up to speed, Arthur and I used to be business partners. We ran our firm together for a little over 6 years. We had some great times that ended recently about 10 months ago, and we've remained friends and everything is all good. But Arthur, we're going to go back to the beginning, and we're going to talk about those really early days, the fun times.
Let's do it.
A couple days ago, you and I were preparing for this and talking about it, and you said to me, those were the good days. I really miss those days. Do you stand by that statement?
I did. Well, I do. And look, obviously, I'm happy where we are as a firm and in my profession, but it was a little more loose, not as much responsibility. I mean, obviously, I didn't have a family that I do today, and so you also didn't really, as you're learning, you're figuring things out. You don't really know what's expected. So it's all very new. It's all very exciting. Right now, we've pretty much hit a nice flow. And so the day to day is, pretty much routine. Whereas back then it was kind of like the Wild West. We were signing cases. We were trying to, we weren't doing specifically personal injury. We were practicing what we call door law, right? Anything that comes through the door. And it was just an exciting time. And so for different reasons, I enjoyed it back then. But I mean, obviously I enjoy what we're doing now, and, the practice is doing better than ever. So it's an exciting time now, but it was just different, man.
Awesome. No, absolutely. And I kind of want to get into that a little bit. When you talk about an office and you talk about, an exciting time of learning everything, what were the areas of practice that you took cases on in your first year?
Yeah, so just a little bit of history. We started the practice right out of law school. I graduated in 2009 from Thomas Jefferson, and for those that remember, there was the big recession. A lot of firms were either closing their doors or laying off a lot of people, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity when I passed the bar and then was looking for employment. So two buddies of mine from law school, said, you know what, why don't we hang our own shingle and see how it goes. So the first office was one of our former partner's second bedroom in his apartment in Pacific Beach, San Diego. And I had the fax machine. I lived a block away from him, right? So I had the fax machine in my office. He had the phone line in his office. So the main phone was his line. And so if we ever had to fax anything, he'd have to run over to my house, and then we'd scan it and send it. But any calls that were coming in were going to his house. So we were basically just figuring it out, right? And then back then, with the recession being what it was, we were doing, civil litigation, bankruptcy, a lot of bankruptcy back then, and personal injury and real estate. And those were, we were trying to, basically get clients and pay the bills. And obviously our overhead was a lot less back then, but we're still trying to make money. And we were essentially just networking and trying to meet people and just signing whatever case we took. Some of them we probably should have said no to, and we learned that the hard way. But back then, we were starting the company, and we're just taking any case we could get our hands on.
Yeah, let me get some more detail on that. So it was, if I remember correctly, I'll fill in the names here. It was you, Mike, and Craig, right? That started out
Correct.
Out of law school.
Yes.
And so you and Mike lived about a block away from each other, correct?
Right. So Mike and I, we were the ones that kind of started the practice. Craig was working for someone else. He was doing estate planning for someone else. So he was kind of working with us, but also had another job. And so ultimately we talked to Craig and said, look, man, like if you're all in, we need you to be all in. So you got to make a decision. He chose to go with the estate planning, and he's doing great. He's stuck with estate planning. He's been doing it since he graduated as well. And so then it was just Mike and I, right? And Craig helped us because we were doing some wills and trusts and stuff like that. And Craig still helped us in handling those clients. Um, but ultimately, we ended up getting a space with subletting from a mortgage company because they had a huge space with a call center and everything.
Yeah.
But they had, when the market crashed, they had a ton of space left over. So we were trading services. So we were helping with some of their clients who needed to file for bankruptcy and do like a short sale. And then in return, we were able to share some space. And so, like I said, it was like the Wild West. We were figuring it out, doing whatever we took. When we got that first office, it was a big deal to us, but it was a dump, man. It wasn't a great office. We were in the back of this, old mortgage company, but I was working with one of my close friends who I'm still in a fantasy football league with him, and we still talk regularly. It was, we were figuring it out. So
Yeah, absolutely. No. So,
I don't know where you want to go from there.
well, before we get into this, the back of the mortgage company office, uh, I want to talk about the Pacific Beach home office. So you and Mike are blocked away
Oh
from
yeah,
each other. You've got essentially half the office with the fax machine. He's got the phone
yes,
line. And then did you guys just have like two cans on a string where you would be like, hey, there's a call coming in. Do you want to take the call?
yeah, pretty much. No, we use our cell
Oh,
phones,
yeah.
right?
That's
So
right.
we had our cell phones, and so most of the time I had my desk and the fax machine set up in the same, my bedroom, right? So we had, a small little apartment in Pacific Beach. I had, the living space and then the home office and the bedroom. And so I would just, wake up in my, pajamas, go to the desk, start calling, do what I need to do. I was haggling with adjusters, getting, faxes in, doing what I needed, scanning those, sending them over to Mike so he could get them in his emails. And so it was really, I mean, again, it was a very just a bare bones operation,
Yeah.
but it worked, and we grew from there. And so, and again, like, we had the good thing about back then is, when you have like 10 clients, it's easy to give them all your undivided
Yeah.
attention. And so every client we had, I remember, one of my first ones, his name was Mark. It was a great case. It was a rear end auto accident. He ended up needing to have foot surgery, but it was a $30,000 policy. And I remember getting the policy, and they were basically, all right, look, the case is there. We're going to tend to the policy limits. And I just went guns blazing. I was like, no way, this isn't enough. There's no way we're going to accept that. And, then I talked to some friends, and they're like, hey, what else are you going to get from that case? Those are the limits. The guy's insolvent. That's how it is. So first case, I kind of, I learned that. And now seeing, you learn a lot in the 12 years of practice, but that was one client that I still remember him. Unfortunately, he has passed away. I found that out about a couple of years ago. But we were friends ever since. I had that case with him because you could really create a bond with the clients that when you don't have that many. Now we have a lot, but you still want to create that bond, that chemistry with the clients. But it was easier when you didn't have as many.
Yeah. Well, nowadays, I mean, maybe you have the clients, but they're not necessarily creating the bond with you, but somebody else in the office, right? Because they can't all
Exactly.
create the bond with you, and that's why you have a team. But okay, so you're getting these cases, you're doing some business litigation. Sounds like you were doing personal injury. I know Mike did a lot of the business litigation, and you
Right.
had Craig kind of helping out on some estate planning. And it was basically, hey, anybody need anything? We're here for you. How did you guys get
Yeah,
your
that was
business in
it.
the beginning?
So there were some network groups in Pacific Beach where we lived, and so we would go to those. We would go to all like the happy hours and the events, and in the early days, um, PB Rec Center had an open gym from 1 to 3. So not being that busy, Mike and I would, go to the gym from 1 to 3, play at the open gym, play basketball, and we actually got a lot of cases from the guys that we were playing with, and so it's just the the boots on the ground, just human to human interaction, creating relationships, and then ultimately they say, all right, look, you're a lawyer, my buddy's got a problem, or I got an issue, can you help me? Yeah, of course. What's the issue? And if it was anything that was really out of our um, comfort zone, we would, we had people that we could bring in or consult with. But for the most part, we were able to. take care of the people that were hiring us. And so, but that was it. It was really just networking. And I remember one time we went to a network event and we had our business cards and we were handing them out. And this this older woman, she looks at the card and she says, "Hey, I know where this is. This is an apartment complex." I was like, "No, it's not." I was like, "It's an
It's an
office."
office now.
And so I was like, "Just give me the card back. Don't worry about it." So you know, it's just stuff like that. But we needed it because the mail would go to Mike's
Right.
office and or to Mike's house, which is our office. Until we sublet in the mortgage company.
How
So
long were you doing this apartment office business thing? And it's not like nowadays where everybody works from home and it's just not, there's no stigma to it.
no,
Like back then,
right,
there's a huge stigma to saying, yeah, I'm a lawyer, I'm an attorney, I run my own firm, and I work out of an apartment. Like not even a house. There's an apartment.
right. No,
and
yeah, it was no,
you
absolutely.
would
So we were
business card a
probably
suite
go
number.
ahead.
You would put on your business card a suite number so it looked like an office, but it's an apartment.
No, it's an apartment number. We just I think it was like number B or something like that. And so, hey, that could be a suite, whatever. Let's just say we didn't really meet a lot of clients at the
Right,
office.
right.
We used like Starbucks and because you didn't have a lot of the like the shared space, like
We work and stuff like that.
yeah,
Re-
exactly. We didn't have a lot of those back then. Regis, yeah, and so we just would meet them at like Starbucks or you know sometimes we meet them at like the old law school library. You get a conference room or something in there, and look, the clients they were they trusted us. Like they knew, and we full disclosure, like we told them, look, we're working out of Mike's apartment. We're a startup, but we can handle this case and we can do a good job for you. Just put your trust in us, and they were happy. And then if you look at our Yelp reviews, we still have a lot of those old clients who left us good positive reviews because they were happy with what we did. But yeah, I think we were in the second apartment bedroom for about 6 to 8 months, and then a friend from law school, his cousin was in the mortgage industry, and we were working on a case with my buddy from law school, and he's like, "Hey, I want you to meet my cousin. I think you guys could probably help," because he knew we were doing, the short sale stuff and the bankruptcies with, and so working with his cousin who's doing the mortgages, he thought it could have been a good fit because they were already sending us some clients anyway. So then he put us together, and we turned out they had a few office spaces that we could use. So yeah, that was a big moment for us, right? We got out of the bedroom
Sorry,
and into an office.
sorry. You said that was about 6 months in. So 6 months you were able to find this little mortgage space to get in there.
Right.
Awesome. Oh, and you mentioned that you did bankruptcy. Did you like work at a bankruptcy firm in law school or?
So I in law school I worked for the San Diego Volunteer Lawyer Program, and then just a civil litigation firm. It was a small boutique litigation firm. So that's kind of how I learned, to handle the cases. Um, Bankruptcy was new though, and Craig, who was also doing the estate planning, shared a space with a bankruptcy lawyer. And Craig was also doing a little bit of bankruptcy, but he didn't really like it. He was more focused on the estate planning, and so I learned it. Essentially, you read the study guides, and then you can you learn. There's a program out there called Best Case, and so once you kind of figure out how to use the program and how it applies to the means test and all that stuff, then you can actually pick it up. But bankruptcy is tough because it seems like it could be easy because you're just going on the program and pressing numbers, but or clicking buttons and inputting numbers. But it's tough because there's a lot of liability involved because once you filed, all your assets are held in trust by the trustee. And so if you file something and you miss something and you do something wrong, those assets could be seized. So if you're not careful and you don't know what you're doing, you can really get in trouble that way. And so I did have a mentor that was able to kind of show me the ropes, and he in my first few cases, I would prepare everything, and then I would have him review it to make sure that we were doing it right. And then and if I ever had questions, he was very helpful, and if I could ask him, say, hey, I got a more complicated case, what do you think of this? And you find people who can give you appraisals for properties and stuff like that. Back then, everything was underwater, so you didn't have any issues with the trustee trying to take a property to sell it to pay off creditors. But nowadays it's tough because the real estate market's so high.
Yeah, your partners were doing civil lit, business, real estate,
Yep.
estate planning. You were doing bankruptcy, some personal injury, and you were kind of learning how to be
Right.
a bankruptcy lawyer as well as learning how to be a personal injury lawyer. Did you already know how to do personal injury? How'd you learn that?
So I had more personal injury experience from law school, but I also had another mentor that pretty much showed me the ropes with personal injury, and he's a friend. He was a friend of my father's, and so I've known him like my whole life. And so when I went to law school and I reached out to him. I said, hey, his name is Ron. I said, Ron, I'm new to this. We're starting a practice. I do have some personal injury clients. I had talked to Ron during law school too, and he kind of showed me a couple of things here and there. But then I worked for another firm where I learned more. But Ron was really instrumental in learning the initial phases. Just rep letters,
Yeah,
HIPAAs, policy
yeah,
traces, the basics, right? And then you realize, okay, not all these cases are going to settle. You're going to have to file some lawsuits. And so I had another attorney that I worked with on some of the litigation stuff early on who showed me, how to litigate a case. And so I think it's really important, especially early on, to latch on to people and learn from people who have done it before us. I mean, I feel like even people at the top of the food chain are still learning, right? We're all still learning. We're all trying to perfect this craft in this industry that we've chosen. And so, especially early on, I mean, there's people that have done it ahead of us that know more than us that we can reach out to, and you'd be surprised that people are actually willing to help.
yeah,
And that's what I found,
yeah,
is that people were pretty generous with their time. And so I could call them and ask them questions. Obviously, don't ask the same question twice, right? Do your research and don't abuse
yeah.
that. But I found them very helpful.
And that's a big thing, that if you're going to ask people for help, you're going to find that they're super helpful. But if you find yourself calling and asking the same question, if you find yourself calling and then going completely like against their advice and then asking them to fix the problem when you created a problem for yourself by not listening to them, they're going to start to be a little less helpful as you start moving forward.
Correct. And look, so this, and when we were working together, we experienced this, right? I think we're at a point now though where I'm still helping those who are coming up and learning it, but I'm getting help from those who've done it longer. So I'm kind of in the middle now, right? Where I can help those who haven't done it as long, but I'm still learning from those who have done it, 20, 30 years. And so it's constant, right? We're still
Yeah.
learning. But as you know, those who ask for advice, you give them your best advice, and then they do the opposite, and then they say, "Oh man, you won't believe what happened." I was like, "Yes, I do. You didn't
Yeah,
listen."
I
So
100% believe that.
I mean, that's not. What are you gonna do?
I mean, I can't tell you how many
Exactly.
times we've had that, right? Where
I
people
know.
call us, we tell them what to do, they do the exact opposite. And look, you don't have to listen to everything the person tells you. You have to make your own decisions. You're obviously a lawyer and an adult, but then when you get stuck in a problem, you can't go back to that person and say, "Hey, I screwed up." Because
You can try.
they're,
You can. I don't know.
they're going to be a lot less open to kind of guiding you there. So, but yeah, you're right. Right? It's being aggressive in networking, being aggressive in wanting to
Yeah.
learn. You mentioned a lot of things in the last 15 minutes, 10 minutes, which is you're reading the Rudder Group, you're the practice guys, you're learning how to become a better lawyer, learning how to navigate the court system. You're asking mentors for help. You're having them review your files and give you advice. You're calling others and still networking by talking to your law school friends, et cetera, et cetera. You're then also at the same time figuring out how to get faxes and emails and pay the bill for all that stuff that needs
Yes.
to happen. And then
Yeah.
one thing we haven't even gotten into is when you're doing bankruptcy and stuff like that, you got to collect money from your clients. Like with PI,
Oh yeah.
you get an insurance company sending you a check that you put in your trust account and you get your fees. But on all these other areas of law, you got to get your client to write a check.
Right. And again, there's a lot to unpack there, but the good thing about bankruptcy, and this is what you find a look. If I had to go back to the beginning, I probably would have started with like a business model and mapped it out. I mean, look, hindsight's 2020, right? We were shooting from our hip and just figuring it out. And so the one thing that we realized early is bankruptcy was good because the clients had to pay up front. And so you don't do the work and you don't file the case until you get paid. And it was guaranteed, right? PI stuff took a little bit longer, but when the case is settled, you get guaranteed money because the insurance company was going to pay you, so you were good. The hourly business clients, that was I mean, how much time you got,
Yeah, I got time.
because
Let's hear it.
that was a whole another situation where, and I mean, I don't know, whoever's listening to this, if you've had hourly clients and you've had to, hold their funds in a retainer, send them the hourly billing statements, give them the trust ledger, all that stuff, it's regulated by the rules of conduct. It is a very tedious task in and of itself. And so add to that when the trust gets low and you say, okay, client, now you're down to, $500 or less. It's time to replenish the retainer. It's not always a fun conversation. And you get a lot of, oh yeah, don't worry, checks in the mail. Oh, I'm just waiting for this to happen, then I'll get you. Don't worry. We got a lot of that. And 1 month, 2 months, 3 months go by, and we're not getting any money. And now we're in the negative, right? So we're billing, and each month you still got to work the case. You can't just stop working on the case if the client's not paying you. And so you ultimately start going into like more and more, debt, essentially, the client is. So, if the retainer is $5,000, they ultimately owe you like 20. So if they give you 5 again, that's just gone, right? So it's just a constant battle. And if you stay with it too long, you can't get out of the case because you can't prejudice your client, right? So you're stuck, representing the client. But it's just a tough situation, right? And plus you have a relationship with the clients, so you don't want to, leave them hanging. But at the same time, it is a business. So those were kind of difficult decisions that we had to make.
And I
But in
think
the
it's
beginning,
sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
But in the beginning, when the retainer's there, they're paying, right? So it's good. And that was also to help with the bankruptcy stuff, because those were initial money that we were seeing while the personal injury cases were taking their time to settle.
Yeah. And for those that are listening, to touch on something that Arthur's saying, if you're working business cases now and you're at a larger firm, chances are you're working, you don't have to worry about that stuff, right? You're going to get paid no matter what, whether the client pays or not. Your boss, your payroll gets hit on the firm. But 2, chances are you're dealing with large businesses or medium-sized businesses,
right,
that understand that litigation is part of the process of owning a business. When you're starting out and you're thinking about the businesses that are hiring the brand new attorneys to be their business lawyer,
yeah,
you're not dealing with the most savviest of business owners. And
we used to get paid in meatballs and chicken quesadillas. I mean,
don't forget the salsa.
you remember those days? The salsa, that's right. Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, you can't pay the bills with meatballs and salsa. What a world!
I remember one time walking to the break room and there was a bunch of salsa there, and I was like, "Oh, who brought the salsa?" I thought somebody brought it from home. And you're like, "Nope, that's so and so client paying their bill again."
You're like, they got another month because they brought us some chips and salsa from it was a restaurant client, right? They're like, "We can't pay you, but here's some food." I was like, "Oh man, yeah, those were the days, man."
Yeah, those were the days. So you move into this mortgage company, the back of this mortgage company,
yes.
and you need some help, and you start getting some interns from the local law school. Tell me
yes.
about what you did there.
So this is where things get interesting, right? Because ultimately, so Mike and I, we bring on another attorney, Eric, who we partner up with, who is going to handle a lot of he was already doing short sales. And so Eric and I worked well together doing the short sale bankruptcy combinations, because you get lead from the court, you can then represent the client. You can do these things called, lien strips, where you can remove the second. So it was a whole thing, right? I did it, and I was good at it when I was doing it, but I'm glad I'm not doing bankruptcy anymore. It's a tough gig, and I enjoy representing, injured victims and PI cases a lot more than bankruptcy. But for a time there, Eric and I were doing it, and so we teamed up with Eric, and so it was the 3 of us, and we figured, okay, we got a nice little base going. We start finding our routine. Let's reach out to I was an intern, and I'm sure you were too during your law school, career. And so I was like, I really enjoyed my internships. I learned a lot. I feel like we can, bring someone on and have some, they can help us with some stuff and learn at the same time. And so, we brought on Brent, who you were friends with, and Brent was great. Mike loved Brent.
Yeah.
Mike and Brent have a really strong bond. I liked Brent too. Eric did too.
Yeah.
So he was a great guy. We played basketball with him. He was a great guy, and he's a good attorney. So yeah, we had our first intern. That was another big moment for us, right? So then you fast forward. We're like, all right, hey, this is working out. Why not hire some more? And so that's where lo and behold,
So then,
Mr. Shah comes in.
So at this point,
you want to take it from here?
This wonderful intern comes to your office by the name of Pratik Shah. And
wonderful.
So here's how this worked out. Just for the audience, a little background. Brett and I were friends in law school, and we're in the same section. We shared notes, all this stuff. We were good friends. We played basketball together, all that stuff. And Brent's telling me, man, I'm interning at this law firm right now. These guys are killing it. They're ballers. I'm like, bro, you got to get me in. Like, get me an interview. Like, I got to get this job because you love it so much, right? So he gets me the interview and gives me the office address. I'm like, cool. I roll up. It's in this little business park. I'm like, nice. Okay, not bad, right? And it's a real. I can't find the suite number because he gave me some like suite number or location. And I'm like, I can't seem to find the suite number. And so I walk into the building that I think is next door to your office because I'm like, it's got to be somewhere in here, and I can't seem to find it. I'm running late. I'm like, oh my God, I'm running late for this interview, this baller law firm. And the lady in the front of the real estate call, I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm a little lost. I'm looking for this law firm. And they're like, oh yeah, they're in the back. I was like, what?
In like the storage room.
Yeah, and I walked past this real estate company where you've got like 20 cold callers just like dialing on the phone, boiler room status, walking the back. Yep. And then I think Brett was there that day. And then there's like 3 offices and 3 cubicles. And then I could hear Mike and the real estate guy like getting into it over something. I was like, what is going on?
The relationship with our landlord at the time ultimately broke down, and I think you were witness to that. But a couple things there. One, I appreciate how Brett saw us at that time. Because we weren't killing it, we were not ballers. No. we were just figuring it out. But it was just some friends running a law practice, and we had each other's backs. We supported each other. I mean, through thick and thin, we got it done.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I can only imagine what you were feeling when you came in and you're like, these guys ain't balling. Where am I right now?
Brent just steered me. Am I in the wrong place? But it sounds like ever since then, it's been looking up for you. So, I'm not going to say it's coincidence. I'm not going to say that I had everything to do with it, but ever since I interned, the business went in
that was
direction.
It. That was our tipping point. We were going to go up or down, and once you came on board, yes, everything went up after that. But no, I mean, I think it was you and Justin that started interning with us at that time, right? And so Justin, great guy. I mean, still friends with him too. And it was you, Justin, Brent, Mike, Eric, and I.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was fun, man. Like it was a good time, and we still were getting the job done. We were litigating cases. I remember you had that it was that the abuse case that was up in LA, and you helped with the deposition, and it's just like we were still doing a good job for our clients. We didn't have a lot of clients, but we were helping those that we had. And in the meantime, I was enjoying the process. It's stressful, right? Don't get me wrong. It wasn't all fun and games. Like it was like there were some serious like gut wrenching moments where I was like, did I make the right choice? Should I go get a job somewhere? And I talked to people, who had done it before me, and I kind of picked their brains, and most of them said, if you stick with it, you're gonna be happy that you did. And I am. I am happy that I did. But at the same time, when you're going through it and you're making like bringing home like $500 a month,
Yeah.
at best. On the down month, sometimes it ebbs and flows, but you really question your decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so it was it was fun, but it was also stressful, but it was exciting. It was a lot of emotion going on. But yes, when you and Justin and Brent came on, like those were good times for me. Like I enjoyed it, and obviously you and I became friends. I think early on you guys we got along pretty
Yeah.
well, and so it just kind of grew from there.
Yeah, and so I want to touch on two questions. One, the money question. In those first few
Mm-hmm.
years, and I'm only talking about between when you and Mike had the offices in the apartments, and for the time that you were in the mortgage in the back of the mortgage company or real estate company.
Yeah.
What would you say was the lowest amount of money you took home in a year during those two periods?
Oh, so like the first year, I think we made like 10 grand each.
Yeah.
I was basically living off. So I had taken out a little more like student loans, and so I put some of that away, and that was like it was like the post bar loans, right? So it kind of got me through the bar and all that stuff. But I had put some of that away so that we could have a little bit of breathing room when I was starting the company. And Mike, his either fiance or wife at the time, she was working, so she was kind of helping him. But yeah, man, things were tight. I didn't have the I didn't we didn't have the overhead at the firm, and I didn't have the responsibilities to my family
Yeah.
that I did back then either. So I was living on a budget, but it was fine, right? You were making it work.
And there's like two types of overhead, right? Like you said, there's the business overhead and then there's the personal overhead. And at that stage in your
Exactly.
life, you don't have either because you're not like dealing with
Exactly, right?
a mortgage or expensive cars or anything like that. And you're just kind of,
Correct.
you just need beer money, essentially. You're on an undergrad
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had my surfboard. I lived by the beach, so I could go surf. That didn't cost me anything. I could have fun there. We go out to we were going out in Pacific Beach and like kind of networking in that area. So a lot of times there would just be sponsored happy hour stuff like that. I wasn't living large, but I was still living comfortably. But I didn't have kids. I didn't have a family. No mortgage, and so I could live off $1,000 a month,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it was just, and obviously real estate was rent was a lot cheaper back then. But it was just you didn't have that, so I was also able to focus a little more of the like kind of the cap. Like we reinvested a lot in the company, right? So we were taking home less because we were putting a lot more into the company.
And when you say
And that's kind of what
reinvesting, you mean like you take that salsa and then like give it to somebody else?
yeah.
Or like, what do you?
Yeah, we would take the salsa and then we'd give it to our referral sources, and then they'd send us more cases.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
That's the way to do it. But we kept the meatballs for ourselves. That was the kick.
That makes sense. No, but, yeah,
but
go ahead. Sorry.
No, but as you grow, it costs more money, right? And so where do you find it? You can get a line of credit, which ultimately we ended up getting down the road. But it's just one of those things where you gotta feed the machine. You can't just become complacent. You gotta keep feeding it. Otherwise, it just runs out of gas.
Yeah.
So that's what we were doing.
Yeah. And so, okay, you mentioned there were some like dark days in those two moments, and when you started questioning your decisions about whether you were gonna make it, or if this was your commitment or not. What led to those dark days? Like, give us an example.
So I can tell you a exact moment that is burned in my memory. Probably a low point in my legal career was there was a case we had. It was a lawsuit and a cross complaint, and Mike and I were litigating this one together. I was helping with the business side because there was a defense firm that was they had been doing it for a lot longer than us, and they were kicking our butts. I guess they weren't defense. They represented the other side, right, in their defense and the cross complaint. And so they were just wiping the floor with us. And so we really we grew a lot in that case because we had to step our game up. But we got to about a month before trial, and it wasn't looking good for us. Clients didn't have money to pay us. The other side had all the resources in the world, and we were just getting hammered, right? And so the clients, the problem, and there were some bad facts of the case that came out, right? And so I remember sitting in our conference room that we shared with a mortgage company, was around like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. Clients came in, and we were probably sitting there talking to them for about, an hour, 2 hours, just about the reality of the situation and how, if we can't figure out some sort of compromise, some sort of settlement, that things could go really south in the trial phase. And dude, they weren't having it. They were guns blazing. We know we're gonna win. We know you guys can do it. And I just, no matter what we told them, it wasn't getting through. And it was just a tough situation, right? And so you learn, I think, anyone who's doing this long enough, who owns their business long enough, you learn the cases that you should say no to. But in the beginning, when you're signing everything, you don't say no much. And so that's one of the things I kind of learned, and what's, I think, helped us get to where we are today, is realizing the cases that you should not take versus the ones you should take. I mean, obviously the ones you take, right? There's good cases and there's not as good cases, but you really want to watch out for like the problem clients.
And I think,
and that's where things get a little dicey.
And that's what I want to jump on, right? It's easy to say, when you look at a case, to say, okay, this is a bad case. I just don't think there's a viable case here, and say no to that. That's easy. That's not hard to do. It's easy to look at a great case and say, okay, this is a great case. I want to take on this case. What's hard is when you've got a good or solid case with a very bad client, or a terrible or a super high maintenance client. That's the hard one to say no to, because you've got, hey, this is a viable case. If the bad client has a bad case, easy to say no to. But if the bad client has a good case, that's where it gets tough. Would you agree?
And absolutely. And think about it, back then when we were renting out of a mortgage company, like we needed money at the time, right? To survive and to keep the doors open and to kind of push the business forward. So that makes that decision even harder. When you have, a client, you're telling yourself, okay, don't worry, I can handle this. It might be a little difficult, but whatever, they're paying the retainer. There's a lot of work that's coming up. We know it's guaranteed. Like, it's going to be fine. You don't realize in that moment, like what you're hitching your name to and how it's going to go. And so the more experience you get, you can kind of foreshadow, right? And you can understand, okay, I've seen this before. I've seen this type of client before. I know where this is going to end up in about 6 months to a year. I'm probably going to try to avoid that and focus on some other, better priorities here. But at the time, you don't know, man. It was tough.
Yeah, you don't know. And it's also, if you're the one that meets with the client and you're like, hey, there's a decent case and they're willing to cut me a check, but they're just going to be really tough, and I know it. It's hard to go to your business partners, who everybody is struggling, and say, look, they got a good case and they're going to pay us, but I just don't got a good feeling. They're going to be like, who cares about your feelings? You better go sign that client and deal with it.
Absolutely. And it's also the fact that you want to go to your clients and say, hey, I just got a great case. We're going to make some money on this. There's a lot of work. We can do this. Like, we can help these people. You want to take that news back to your partners, especially on the early days, right? I mean, even today, when you get a big case, like, it's exciting, right? But early on, I mean, you're looking for it. You're hungry. Like, you got to be, right. You got to be chasing that. And so you're always looking for that. Unfortunately, live and learn, right? You learn things the hard way sometimes, and we did. But in the end, I mean, that case still resolved. I mean, we were able to kind of talk some sense into him, but that was a really dark evening. And I remember looking at it was Mike and I in the room, and afterwards I just looked at it and I was like, what are we gonna do? And so I think it was shortly after that I was kind of second guessing my decision, because I was like, I don't know if I can do this. But you survive, and you do the work. Really, what it comes down to is if you do the work, you put in the time, more often than not, you're going to be all right. In that case, we just took the time, and we a couple things went our way, leading up to the trial, and so we were ultimately able to, get somewhat of a decent, settlement out of it. But it was a tough it's a tough road getting there, man.
Yeah, and once you're stuck, there was a movie one time where they asked people, like, what are you afraid of? And the guy says, quicksand, in the sense that sometimes when one thing goes wrong, then another thing goes wrong, then another thing goes wrong. And it's kind of like that sometimes when you're in the wrong case. You just can't catch a break. Defense is pounding you on whatever motions, or they're just catching you, left and right on stuff. Your client's not giving you the discovery you need. the judge is ruling
Yeah,
against you. Everything's just going sideways on you, and you feel like you just can't. There's no rope to hang on to.
exactly. And so we quite, but again, the duty is to the client. You owe them diligent representation, and so you can't just say, "Hey, sorry, I'm out." You got to stick with it. You got to do the job.
Yeah. So okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. So you go from the 2 apartment office, which I mean, I would argue that's a dual location. You had 2 locations.
Yes, we were a multi-office law firm at
Yeah,
that
yeah.
point.
And
Correct.
then,
Correct.
then you move into you downgrade to a single location in the back of a
Yes.
mortgage office. How long were you guys there in the mortgage office?
So I think we were there for about maybe like 2 years,
Okay.
and then we found it was I don't know, you remember the old office, right? Yeah. So it was a motel that had been transformed to a commercial office,
Yeah.
and so we at a certain point the relationship broke down with the person who owned the mortgage company. And so we're like, look, we can't stay here anymore. Like every day we're coming in, it's a hostile environment. Like we got to get out. So we just found a cheap office, and we were able to, the landlord was great. It was already a shell, so that he built it out for us. Um,
And
I mean, looking back on it now, it was super ugly, but it worked for us.
and-
Our design was terrible. We couldn't decide paint. We couldn't decide anything. Remember those days?
yeah.
And so it looked. We thought, what is it? What we thought, what is a law firm supposed to look like? Mahogany, furniture, leather chairs, stuff like that. So we got it all dirt cheap, and it looked cheap, but this is what we thought an office was supposed to look
Yeah.
like. Now everything's a lot more modern. You have the nice, the LVP wood floors, the lighter colors. Everything's more modern. But we were like, okay, what is a law firm supposed to look like? You live and learn, man. Like we figured it out.
Yeah, and just for the record, yeah, it was a motel that got turned into an office, but that makes it sound worse than it was. It wasn't bad. I mean, there were a lot of
Yeah,
other
it
business
wasn't
owners
bad.
there. There was an accountant. There was who was the other guy next to him? A
Yes,
real estate agent or something like that. It was
yeah. There was a real estate company there. There was two accountants there. There was an insurance agent. So yeah, it was a legitimate commercial
yeah,
building, but no elevator.
no
There
elevator.
was 2 levels of stairs, and so that was a problem with clients who had been, for injury clients. And so it was again a stepping stone. We went from the apartment to the sublet to our own office, right? And again, we were very proud of it because it was ours. I think we had to put like 5,000 down for first and last months, and some TIs or some furniture and stuff that were our own, and like that was a lot of money for us back
Yeah,
then, right?
yeah,
And so we we were able to do it, and we set it up, and we had our own space, and it was that was our first like real office. Obviously, I have fond memories of it, but look, I would never go back to
yeah,
that. I mean, I
yeah.
would never. Yeah, it was again a stepping stone, but happy to be where I'm at today.
And not getting into it with the landlord every day. So let's switch gears a little. Let's
Yes,
talk a little bit about hiring. I mean, obviously you had, a couple of interns in the
yeah,
old office, and you started, at some point realizing like we're just not going to be able to build this firm off of just interns.
correct,
So what did you do there?
right. So essentially, the caseload starts to grow, right, and then we start to narrow in our practice areas. And so, I was probably doing about 75-25 bankruptcy to personal injury at that point. And so, we probably had about 50 to 100 like personal injury cases, and it's hard to do that when it's just you, right? So, and then Mike had his Mike and Eric had their um, litigation cases as well. So we needed a paralegal, and so we looked at just put an ad up on Craigslist and interviewed, and we were ultimately able to find our first paralegal, and that was someone who answered the phone, took in our mail, did all the admin stuff, while at the same time doing discovery, doing the motions, like just helping wherever that was needed. And so that was another big step for us because now we had payroll, right? Now we had someone we actually had to, pay for, and our overhead starts to increase a little bit. You got your rent now, you got payroll now, you got, all the miscellaneous, mail and your energy bill, cable, Ethernet, all that stuff, right? So now we start our overhead starting to increase.
Yeah.
And but I think that's part of the growing process, right? Is that you need to, right? If you're gonna remain stagnant, then you're just gonna stay in the same place. If you want to grow, that's part of growing.
Yeah.
But still, it's stressful, and so we were able to pull it off.
Yeah. So you hire through Craigslist. Does that first employee work out? How long was that first employee with you?
So the first employee was with us for a while, longer than they probably should have, And so, but he was another gentleman that in the beginning, he was a good fit for us because he had experience doing personal injury. He had experience in civil litigation. So we knew what he was doing. Ultimately, he ended up it was more of an attitude thing as opposed to skills.
You outgrew him.
So as and it was one of those things where he wasn't really a team player. And and you're right. So as we grew and we started to bring on even more staff members, I think you came along about a year or two after that. Then we kind of our paths kind of merged up again. How many staff members do we have then? Do you remember?
When I joined, so just a little background, I was an intern. I left. I went and started my own career and started my own firm. And it was maybe about 3 years later that we kind of came back together to try to work together and figure out a way to work together. Right. When I started, I think it was just James, and we ended up hiring one more because we had so many more cases. Once.
Right, because you had your whole book of business.
Yeah.
And so when we merged, there's no way that one paralegal could handle it. And so I think we had some law clerks and we had some interns at the time, but we needed a full-time staff member. And is that when Tanya came about?
No, we had the other guy that we.
I can't remember his name, but
yeah, but again, even back then we saw those.
John. It was John?
I think it was John. But we saw those issues.
Yeah, that's right.
The staff members. And, in the beginning, you're like, oh, maybe it's something we can solve. Let's figure it out. And then, John didn't work out. And then we bring on more staff members. And the same thing keeps happening. And you recognize, we realize what the problem is now.
So, so now we're getting into the phase of,
growth.
I'm not just a lawyer. I'm not just a lawyer. I'm now a manager, right? So as you grow, you kind of have to you start wearing more hats where you're representing your clients, but you're also managing people. And so that was where you don't teach you that in law school, right? There should be a course on how to run a law firm, but it wasn't there when I was going, but maybe it is now. I don't know. But they don't teach you, how to manage people, how to manage the law firm, how to manage, the trust account, which is a big one. I mean, you really need to know these things, and you learn, or you have to learn. But when you start having conflicting personalities at the office, what do you do? It's not like you're a big corporation where you can say, well, you bring in HR and you have them sit down with everybody.
Right.
You put on your HR hat and you got to sit there and deal with it. Yeah. And sometimes it's like raising children or babysitting, where you're just like, all right, like so and so, left a mess at the desk, and they didn't mean to. It wasn't on purpose. It wasn't intentional, but they're just dealing with people, And so you kind of grow. Through our growth, we kind of found out who fit our company and who was a good fit and who wasn't. And I think we got to a place a few years ago of just having a nice team that blends well together and everyone supports each other. There's no drama. Yeah. I mean, that's huge for me, right? I just want to make sure that everybody's happy, right? Yeah. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. And so, but here's the other question is, you're doing personal injury. It's been about 3 years now, right? Because it was 6 months at the 2 apartment place, 2 years at the mortgage place. You have your own spot in Kearny Mesa now. So you're at kind of the 3-year mark, 3.5-year mark. How long were you in the Kearny Mesa spot?
We were probably there for another 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
So because I think we've been at this current office for about 5. So yeah, like 2 yeah, give or take 3 years. Yeah.
So you're almost, 5, 6 years in, something like that at the current
Right.
basis spot
Right.
total, right? At this point in your career. But, the whole time, like you said, the caseload is growing. So that means you're still getting all your business from networking, right? Like you guys aren't running ads or anything, are
Correct.
you?
No marketing whatsoever.
Right.
I think we barely even had a website. We finally got a website.
Right.
The first website was terrible. I think Mike made it on like WordPress. It was awful.
You just
But
got to figure it
hey,
out. And
we had it. It was there.
and that's a function of not having the budget for being able to compete
Correct.
in the marketing space for
Correct.
personal injury. You'd just be throwing money away.
Well, but the AdWords weren't as big back then. I mean, Facebook ads were just starting. I mean, it was a different playing field back then too, right? And so, I mean, obviously a lot's changed, but yeah, I mean, and just like you were doing, it's just personal relationships. Like, I mean, I don't know if this is the right term, but is it B2B, right?
Yeah.
Like one business to another business where we're helping each other out, and I'm creating a relationship with an individual who I can send them cases to. They send me cases, and we all work together. Clients are happy, so they keep sending them. That's really how we were able to grow.
Right. And so,
and I know it was the same for you.
yeah, for sure. But this is the question that I'm coming to is you've been out there hustling for 4 or 5 years. You've been growing. You've got a good reputation. Your Yelp reviews are good. I mean, at this point, you're doing personal injury almost exclusively. You said you're about 80%. You must just be getting tons of 7-figure cases.
Oh yeah, tons. That's all we were getting at that point. No, man, dude, you're talking like, I think I remember settling one for 85,000. That was and I was like, oh my god, that's such a big result. I can't believe they paid that.
Yeah.
And now that's like, okay, great. Now on to the next one, right? But I remember we got a big case. It was a motorcycle accident, and the at fault driver had a 250 underlying and $1 million umbrella. And this is the first time I had to handle a case this large. I did talk to some of my mentors, about, oh my gosh, like I want to make sure this case gets all the attention that it needs, so that we get the absolute best result for the client. And I remember when I signed the client, he was a really good guy. He was an outdoor, he skied, he surfed, all the kind of stuff that I like to do. And so him and I really created a bond, and him and I, still to this day are friends. But I would do anything for him. And if he needed, I helped him. He had some issues with his dad. He was living at home, and I one day he called me and he's like, Art, I'm at a really low point right now. Like I need some help. My dad's kicking me out of the house, and his leg is all messed up, and so he can't move on his own. He's like, I got no one else to call. So I said, don't worry, man, I got you. So I get in my car, I drive over there, load up the car with all his stuff, and drive him over to one of his other buddies' places, unload it, set him up. I'm like, you good? You need anything else? He's like, no, I just really appreciate you, right? So no matter whatever he needed, he got it from us, And so that was a case and a client who, again, still is very dear to me, because we ultimately got, the full policy. He was very happy. He was very grateful throughout the process. He was also just a good guy, and he was one of those clients where, he was very, respectful to the staff. Sometimes, it doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
But he was also very appreciative and very thankful. And so it was mutual in that respect. But that was what, like 6-7 years in until I got a case of that size. I think before that we had settled one for like, I think it was like 450, and that was, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like we were able to get this, And that was a heavily litigated case against a well-respected defense firm out here, and it was just me, And I remember getting a life care plan. I had to spend like $10,000 getting a life care plan. I was like, oh my gosh, and I was tripping because if the case didn't settle in mediation, we had some serious costs coming up for trial, and we were going to have to probably look outside the firm to get some funding to figure out what we're going to do. But the case settled, and the client was thrilled. She's also a friend to this day. But it's just you figure it out, man. You do what you got to do.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how stuff scales, because we've heard that $10,000 number now twice. One was that was the amount you made in an entire year in your first year of running a law firm, and now you're spending it on one part of one case. And you just have to get
Exactly.
comfortable with that stuff as you grow. I gotta imagine that must have been really painful to get that invoice from the life care planner that's at that moment and say, oh, it's 10 grand. I mean, that's a partner meeting type of time, which is, hey, we got to talk about
Exactly.
this.
Yeah.
What do we want to do
Exactly.
here? What's the plan?
Well, and it was one that I paid. I put the three grand for the retainer,
Right.
and then they sent us the bill for the remaining $7.
Mm.
And so, I talked to him. I was like, look, like, I'll pay you like $2 now, $2 next month. So we figured it out, right?
Yeah.
And then the case settled, and I paid off the balance. But yeah, I mean, you gotta figure it out, right? And it's not difficult if you put in the work, but it is stressful because your clients are relying on you, and if you're not willing to go all the way, they're not getting good representation, And so you gotta be all in, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're just kind of if you're not going all in and you're just starting a practice, I don't think it's gonna work out. Like you got to be 100% committed.
Yeah. And so, okay, so then at some point you had a fourth partner.
Yes. And he was all right. He wasn't that great, he was, but no. So when, it didn't work. No, it never works out. Yeah. So, so what happened is, when you brought your cases on, it was ultimately like, okay, you're going to be an associate, and you collect you collect a base plus all the it was a percentage of the cases that you brought in, right? And so at a certain point, you're like, look, like this isn't really working out. I want to have my name on the door. And I remember I was talking to one of our former partners. He's like, oh, the audacity! How could this be? How could he come out with this demand? I was like, dude,
I wouldn't say I made a demand. You brought it up.
Well, yeah, all right. So, but that's no. I don't think you were making a demand. You were saying like, right? You were saying like, it's not working out. I was like, but I saw the potential, right? And I saw, you were out, and really what it came down to was, personal injury was that was doing the best for us, right? Like personal injury is where we were paying the bills, we were making money. That's ultimately what became our focus because we were doing well there, and some of the other partners didn't want to do that, and so I knew when you came in, I was like, oh great, like someone else is doing PI. I can work with Pratik, like we can work cases together. We can figure out, strategies, and he also has a good caseload.
Yeah,
this is going to be great for us. And so I knew that for us to grow, that it would have been stupid not to have you as part of the practice.
Yeah.
And so when you said that, I was like, well, what? And I think I asked you, I was like, well, what is it going to take?
Yeah.
Because I think you came to me and you were like, what, it's not really working out.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, well, what's wrong? What do you need? And he's like, I think I want to have my name on the door. I think I want it to be mine, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, why not? Well, let's just slap it up there, and you got it, right?
Yeah.
And
that's how I remember it as well. Was like I was just like,
yeah.
I'm not saying I want my name on the door here. Like I just want my own thing. I want to own it. And then you were like, well, why don't we just do that with us? And I was like, well, yeah,
right.
I'm open to that.
Well, because I think you were like, is that an option?
Yeah.
I was like, I think so. Let me talk to the other partners. And that's when there was a conversation with one of them. They're like, no, there's no way. Like, how could he do that? I'm like, honestly, guys, like, this is a business decision. Like, you got to take the emotion out of it. Like, this isn't personal.
Yeah.
If this is what makes the most sense for the company, then we need to do it. And then, ultimately we did, and it worked out. And, we hit another big case, the gas bar case. So that was a big one that we hit. And then you had a couple hits, that year.
Yeah.
And then we were able to move into a much nicer office.
Yeah.
And it's where we're currently located. And we really, I mean, when we started hitting some of those big PI cases, again, we reinvested in the firm. We brought on more attorneys, probably more than we needed because they were doing a lot of the business stuff, and it didn't make financial sense.
Yeah.
But we really went hard in like staffing and, investing in the company and kind of growing it around us. So it was, when you came on, it was nice because I was learning from you on some of the litigation and the trial stuff. We were able to collaborate a lot. Yeah. I mean, it was good there.
Yeah.
And then when we
figured out what each other's strengths were, right? Like we were both
Exactly.
handling
Right.
case loads, half pre-lit, half lit or whatever. And then eventually it was like,
Yes.
I did not enjoy doing pre-lit. Like obviously it makes sense. It needs to be done the right way and it needs the right amount of attention, but I just didn't enjoy
Right.
dealing with adjusters and it just wasn't my thing. And then
No, you hated
I
it.
hate
We used to talk about it. Yeah, you hated it.
It's the worst because I would just get pissed and I would just say, you know what, we're just gonna file and you would be like, look, we can work with this. Like, let's negotiate here. And I was like, no, they're being unreasonable.
Yeah.
We're just gonna file. We're not dealing with this. So then
Right.
eventually we split it up where you did all the pre-lit and I did the lit, and that worked out
Right.
well.
Yeah.
But then over time,
yeah, go ahead. Well, yeah. So like, I mean, and ultimately we made that decision, and it freed us up, right? Because you could really just focus on the litigation stuff, the discovery, the depots, all the stuff that needs to happen in lit. Where as I was running, probably what, like 200, like probably 150 to 200 cases in pre-lit because I don't have those hard deadlines. It's not as time consuming, and so it freed me to do my part, and then it freed you to do your part.
Yeah.
And it was a model that I think we were just kind of talking one day, and it's like, let's just try it out, see how it goes. Because I was like, oh great, I don't have to do discovery anymore. Now this is before Esquire Tech, which that changes things.
Yeah.
But it's been great for us.
Yeah.
And so we still have that model in place, but with using more of those automated systems and just having a nice software program that helps our clients. It's like there's tools out there that you kind of learn also along the way that kind of help you run the business.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. You don't know all that right away. You learn it as you grow. But as you learn it, and if you're not as resistant to change as that I am, I have things set a certain way, and I like doing them that way.
Yeah.
But I've come around.
Yeah.
You gotta admit, I'm coming around a little bit.
It's everybody has to adjust as they go. Like for me, I'm constantly I have like entrepreneur ADD sometimes where it's like, oh, let's go try this new thing. It's going to solve all our problems. But the reality is like not always. Sometimes it just causes more problems, and you need to just work the thing that you have and not try to go find a new thing, right? Because when you look online, it makes you feel like somebody's got a secret out there that you don't know about, and that's what it is, and I need to go buy that, and I need to go do that, and that's just not necessarily true.
Well, and I think that's like one of the negative things about social media, right? Is that you go on social media and you see all these things that are being kind of thrown in your face. That's like, oh, sign up for this plan and you'll succeed immediately. Like there's no overnight success story, right? It takes work, and you got to just grind it out, and you got to do the job and put in the time, right? You see, I mean, I think social media kind of creates like an image of success that is a little bit false, whereas people you think people are just like an overnight success, but you don't see what's going on in the background, right? Like you don't see what it took to get there.
Yeah.
And I know there's other lawyers and other attorneys who have talked about this, where it's and someone made this analogy. It's like Facebook or Instagram or whatever the social media platform is. That's what people look like, dressed up in a tuxedo. You don't see someone right when they woke up, getting out of bed in the morning, going to work. No one's posting that. You're posting everyone's posting at their best.
Yeah.
And so the reality is we're all in it. We're all fighting. We're all doing our thing, and we just got to stick with it.
Yeah. So you're right. So you got to stick with it. So you're in this new office, higher overhead.
Mm-hmm.
You've got 3 partners now: Mike, myself, Eric.
Right.
And now where you're at is you're in the same office, but now you got a whole different partner in Irving Pedroza. What happened?
Correct. So you fast forward, and ultimately, once we started doing well, like once we start, you start having some success in these cases, it becomes a little more tense because you have a little bit of a rivalry of, okay, where should the business now go? Like now we can actually, we've learned, we've grown, we're making, sound business decisions, and you need to be on the same page. Otherwise it ain't going to happen, right?
You're not getting your cases from the recreational basketball league anymore.
We ain't playing ball anymore.
Exactly.
We don't have time for that anymore, right?
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. Those are the good times of the old days. I can go play basketball in the middle of the day. Can't do that now.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish, but so basically you got to make these decisions as to how the practice is going to run. And you and I both know that personal injury was doing pretty well. And so we were all in. We were all in doing personal injury. Like that's where we wanted to focus our attention. there was a difference of opinion, and so one thing led to another, and people went separate ways, and so then it was just you and I, right? So it was you and I, all in doing personal injury. Then we added the property damage practice as well because that you're still dealing with insurance
Yeah.
companies, and it's kind of a similar trade practice area. And so you and I, I think it was just the two of us maybe for what, like 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
and we had a staff, right? So it was Irving, it was Megan
Yeah.
ultimately came on board. We have a dynamite support staff with our paralegals. So we're rocking and rolling, right? And so everything was going good. Obviously, there was an opportunity that came by, so you took the opportunity. Irving was the natural
Yeah.
choice because he's doing all the stuff that you were doing with the litigation and handling the litigation clients, while I'm basically managing the office and handling the pre-lit.
Whoa, whoa,
So
whoa.
we're streamlined.
Are you trying to say that I was easily replaced?
No, but we had to do something,
Because
I
that's what
couldn't.
it sounds
So, so all right. So after my month of crying in the office after you left, so after I came to grips,
like. Yeah.
once I started getting out of bed again,
Yeah.
then we had to make the
That
decision.
makes
But
me feel.
no, there was I skipped over the morning period, So
You're
once
like, oh
yeah.
yeah, Monday he left, Tuesday we were good to go. I mean, no big deal. Worked out.
No, come on. And that's not true, man. No, we've talked about this. But you got but again,
Right.
it's like,
Do something.
it's
What do you
another
do? You still got payroll. You still got clients that need to be serviced. You still
exactly.
got staff that
Right.
are looking to you for leadership. When something like that happens, where a partner in the business leaves, because when you and I were
Yep,
partners, we had two partners that we had to separate from for various reasons. And
exactly.
that's still a conversation you got to have with your team and say, guys, don't panic. Don't start looking for other jobs. Like everything is good. Business is still flowing.
Right.
Payroll's still going to get hit. If this happened, you have to just let it go and just keep working on your jobs. Our clients still need representation, and that's the truth at the end of the day. No matter who leaves, right? No matter
Correct.
what they contributed, it doesn't matter.
Right. And any business, no matter how large or how small it is, the day-to-day operations or year to year, I mean, you're going to be throwing curveballs. Things are going to change.
Yeah,
I mean, look what happened. Look what's going on with Twitter.
yeah,
Like Twitter, monster company. Elon Musk comes in and buys it, shakes the whole thing up. I mean, it can happen to anybody, right? And so but you have to have an infrastructure in place. You have to have a good support system, and I think as long as you have that, you can build and you can grow on that, right?
yeah,
And there's books out there. We've talked about like Traction and Fireproof, which I think give a lot of good, they give some advice and they give you some tips as to how to run the practice. But eventually you got to make it your own and you got to find what works for you, right?
yeah,
And I'm still learning. I'm still figuring it out. When we were no longer working together, when you and I talked about this, like I had to really kind of like make a gut call. Like, what do I do? Do I just go? Is it just me, or do I bring on another partner? And Irving is a natural choice. Dude, he's great. I mean, he's
yeah,
a great attorney. He knows his stuff. And it allowed us to continue what we're doing without, skipping a beat. Now, again, that's
I
not
know.
to say that
I know. I'm just teasing.
I'm not saying you were easily replaced, but
No,
but we had to do something. You
yeah,
know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, and so that was kind of like the natural choice, and
yeah,
it's been great. I mean, we're doing our thing. The clients are still getting service. We're doing what we need to do, but it's because one, it's because of the things that we've learned from the past,
yeah,
and two, it's understanding the trade, right? Like I think also from where we started being like taking every different type of case, every different type of law, and now focusing on a specific type, like we can really just get good and perfect that one type of practice, and that helps us, that helps the client,
yeah,
helps us get results. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do now.
yeah.
But we didn't start there. We had to go through a lot to get there.
Yeah. And so, a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up here.
Sure.
This was a lot of fun. In the 12 years you've been running your practice, you mentioned a couple of kind of tough points in there, but what would you say was probably like your hardest day?
So aside from that story I had told you before, it was the hardest day was probably the it was the probably the partner separations
Mm.
because and so it was yours, but the
Yeah.
other ones as well because it just changes. Things change so much, and like yours wasn't as bad because you and I were on good terms and we had everything. It was a pretty smooth transition. Like you were very helpful,
Yeah.
but like when you have ones that aren't as amicable, dude, those are tough.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's going to happen. Is the business going to get held up? It's kind of like it's like a divorce, right? It's a business divorce. And so those were probably the hardest for me.
Yeah. And
So choose your partners wisely.
yeah, yeah. And so the next question is, in 12 years of running a business and from where you've gone from the beginning to where you're now where you are now, speaking specifically to kind of where you are now, running a business, having, all the stuff of being a business owner and being a lawyer, what do you think is the worst part of running your own practice?
The worst part of running the practice is dealing with all the admin stuff that's required as you grow and as you start, doing more, whether it's marketing, payroll, HR, all your insurances, right? Health insurance, disability insurance,
Comp.
your 401k, work comp. I mean, it's almost a full-time job just keeping all the admin stuff up to date, which is why, we recently, when COVID happened, we didn't need as much staff, so we downsized a little bit, but we're kind of back to full capacity now, and we just hired someone new to kind of help with a lot of the admin stuff because, oh man, it's hard to do all of that and still be a full-time lawyer.
Yeah.
That's probably the hardest part of managing the company.
Yeah.
Which is why, and this is what Fireproof and Traction talk about is delegating those tasks, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it is building a team that a good support system, because then it makes your job easier. And as someone else said, someone smarter than me, delegate the stuff that you don't like to do and focus on what you're good at.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, right? If you can hire people that are smarter than you, that are better than you at the things that you're not good at, so that they can take those tasks and you can just focus on your skills.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. One thing we've all heard about during this kind of conversation here is, you've had a lot of partnerships and a lot of partners, but the consistent one has been you. So does that mean you're the problem?
Probably.
No, I'm
yes.
just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, man, you were a great business partner. I enjoy.
Well, it depends. You should. Well, I don't know, man. You might want to have my wife on the podcast. I mean, I'm sure she might agree with you.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm just totally joking. But one of the questions I always ask people, because I think it gives us some real insight, is if you could kind of go back to those early years, like 2010, 11, you were starting out, and let's say you could go back in time and you could talk to the younger Arthur, and you couldn't tell him that you were the future. You had to give him some advice. What advice would you give him?
I would have told him to go hard on the online marketing, because back then it wasn't as big as it is right now. Now it's so competitive, right? I mean, it's crazy where it's gotten to, but back then it was kind of just starting out, right?
Yeah.
And so knowing obviously what you know now, then I would have a huge leg up, because the online presence would be so big, and that's, but aside from that, more of like on a philosophical approach, I would tell him, be careful who you hire, because hiring the right person and building the right team is so critical to running the practice the right way. And if you have the wrong people in the wrong places, it's not going to go well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. I think that's a great place to end. Arthur, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being on, man. Really appreciate your friendship through the years and working with you. I mean, you were a great business partner. I was just joking. But
thank you. I appreciate that.
For everybody else, thanks for listening or watching. We'll see you on the next episode of Bootstrapped Solo. And remember, just because guys like Arthur make it look effortless, it doesn't mean that it is. And for all of you that are out there and you enjoyed the podcast, if you feel like you learned something or you got some value out of it, please feel free to share it on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. We can only grow the podcast and get other great guests if you share and let people know about it. Thank you guys so much. Arthur, thank you again. And I'll see you soon.